Rabbi.
Morning. Good morning. Okay, so we have in front of us the next Gemara is the topic of much discussion, many commentaries, many struggle, many supra commentaries that try to explain the commentaries even, and it all boils down to question of what brachas come first. What is the priority among brachas? And how does that fit into number one, the 7 species that Israel is blessed with, and number 2, a person's interest, either general interest, general liking, cherishing certain foods, or specifically now his interest in those foods, and within the Gemara itself, trying to figure out what the argument is that we had in the Mishnah, because the Mishnah did touch upon this, but it was very vague. The Mishnah said that there is an argument between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis. So we're on page 41a, and we're going to be explaining the Mishnah that was on 40b. The Mishnah had said that if a person has in front of him minin harbe, many types. So Rabbi Yehuda says if you have from the 7 species, you recite the bracha on that. And the rabbis say on anything that you want. So on those words, we're going to now have a entire discussion, nice amount of talk of what that means and how does that apply to practical halacha. So let's do it inside. I know we started it, but let's start again from on 5th line, line 5. Hayu lefanav minim harbe. If a person had in front of him many types of food, and so the question is which one to recite the bracha on. Amar Ula says, Machlaikis, this argument between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis, Rabbi Yehuda says you recite the bracha on the 7 species, and the rabbis say you recite the bracha on the one you want. That argument, Machlaikis, is when their brachas are the same, and the question is, which one do you recite the bracha on? Rashi gives the example that you have zaysim and tapuchim. You have olives and apples, and both of them are bird priya 8s, and you're going to recite the bracha on one and exempt the other. You're going to recite one bracha for everything. So which one should you recite the bracha on initially? In other words, which one is the first, is the one that you're actually reciting the bracha. The bracha will extend itself to the other food item, but which one do you initiate the bracha on? And so on this, that's where there is an argument that we have in the Mishnah, that Rabbi Yehuda says you recite the bracha on, in this scenario, the olive, because the olive is from the 7 species. And the rabbis say you recite it on the one you want. If you want the olive, if you cherish olives, you can recite on the olive. You like apples, recite on the apple. So that is where the machlokes is. The Rabbi Yehuda savar min shiva adif. Rabbi Yehuda holds that the type of from the 7 species that takes precedence. That's better. Rabbanan savri min chaviv adif. The rabbis say the type that is more cherished, that is better.
Rabbi.
Yes.
I have a question. Okay, so if we go according to Rabbi Yehuda, okay, and you have, according to Rashi, you have olives and apples. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, you would say the bracha on the olives, and that is poter on the apples. But now, and so when you come to saying the after bracha, it would make sense because you would then have to say Al ha'etz ve'al pri ha'etz because of the fact that it's a Shiva Minim. Now, if you go according to the Rabbanan and you do it the other way around, where you go the apples first, and that is that supposed to be to poter the olives?
Yes.
And if that's the case, then what do you do with the after bracha? Because now you have a problem. Because you're saying a shehakol that clearly doesn't satisfy the after bracha for the olives. It only takes care of the apples. So what do you do then?
Right. So Ezra is asking a very good question, saying that the rabbis say you go by what you like better. Let's say you like apples better than olives. So you're reciting the bracha on the apple and you're covering the olives. The problem is, regarding the after blessing, the olives deserve a very important after blessing, which is like a long paragraph. And the apple only needs a short after blessing, which is called the Bari Nefashis. So if you're reciting the bracha on the apple, then the after blessing is saying a little sentence bracha Bari Nefashis. What about how are you fulfilling the obligation to recite a al ha'etz val pri ha'etz, the appropriate after blessing for the? In other words, this works in the beginning. What do you do at the end? This works in the bracha before, but it doesn't. What happens for the end bracha, the after bracha? So the answer is that the beginning bracha and the after bracha don't necessarily work together. And I'll give you an example. If you have a little wine, you recite Boire Pri Hagafen, right? You recite the bracha on the wine. You have a very small amount, tiny amount. You recite Boire Pri Hagafen. Then you're having orange juice. So you drink a cup of orange juice with no bracha because the Boire Pri Hagafen, it exempts all drinks. All drinks are now exempted from a bracha. But now you have to recite an after blessing. The after blessing, you can't recite an after blessing on a little tiny dot of wine because it's not the measurement. And you did have a full cup of orange juice. So the after blessing, what do you recite for the after blessing? You recite the orange juice after blessing, even though the bracha, the beginning bracha was the wine bracha. So the wine bracha exempts all drinks, but the after blessing ends up being the bracha on the orange juice. And the same thing here in this scenario, you have an olive and an apple. The beginning bracha you might have recited on the apple and it's exempting the olives, but if you have a large amount of olives, those olives you will recite the bracha al ha'etz v'al pri ha'etz. That will be the bracha even at the end, even if you started off with the bracha on the actual apple. The end bracha will be on the olives. Yes, Ezra, you had a follow-up question.
I was going to ask the question: what happens if it's not just a drop, but it's a kazait or you take melolugmav, in a situation where you actually take in the amount that requires an after bracha. So you explained that.
Yeah, right. So when it comes to wine, there's a few options of what the amount might be. It might be a kazayas. It might be malei lugmav. It might be malei lugmav means a cheekful. Kazayas means an olive size, or it might be a revius, which is a quarter of a lug, which means an egg and a half. That's the measurement. So there are different questions as to, that's why when a person drinks wine, you either drink a drop or you drink a large amount. But if you drink somewhere in the middle, it becomes a question, can you recite the after blessing? Did you drink enough to recite the after blessing? So, but if you do recite the after blessing on the al ha'etz val pri ha'etz, it exempts the other fruits. And so the after blessing, so even if the bracha in the beginning, you recite it on an apple, the after blessing, you would recite the al ha'etz val pri ha'etz Okay, it looks like Simone, you have a question. Simone?
Yeah, so am I understanding you to say that if you have, let's say, grapes or figs or something of the 7 species, and you have another fruit like an apple or an orange, you don't, I had thought you would say both the Alchemichia and the Barei Nefashos, one for the fruits of Israel and the other one just for the other fruits. Is that wrong?
I believe that's wrong. I don't like to give halachic renderings without looking things up again. But I believe you only recite the al ha'etz ve'al pri ha'etz, and it covers the other fruits. It will not cover other items, but fruits it will cover because they're also considered al ha'etz ve'al pri ha'etz. So I'm 99% sure, but I would like to just look it up maybe just before you do it.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, Susan.
Are you telling me that the beginning blessing and the after blessing are not connected? They're not connected?
Well, I didn't say they're not connected. I mean, we're thanking God. I mean, there's one God. Blessings are, praises of God. So I don't know what that means, if they're connected or not connected. What I don't know what you mean by that.
What I'm asking
is that a problem?
No, you said they're not connected.
Well, what I mean by they're not connected is it's not a contradiction if one of them is mainly recited for one item, and the after blessing is mainly recited for other items. They might all cover each other. So it's not a contradiction if you recited the beginning bracha one way and the end bracha ends up being slightly different, not exactly compatible. At least it doesn't look compatible, but it works out. So that's all I said.
Okay, now I get it. Thank you.
Okay, so we have here the statement of Ula that this debate between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis is regarding reciting a bracha on one item and having in mind the others, because they're all part of the same, they all are included in the same bracha, but we don't know which one we're arguing about which one you should start with, which one you should recite the bracha over. And the case where it'll be different brachas, in other words, if it was a different type of case where you have different brachas, you have the example given is a radish and an olive. That would be different brachas. You have a radish, which is Beirei Pri Ha'adama, and you have an olive, which is Beirei Pri Ha'etz. In that scenario, what does our Gemara say? Aval, but, let's read it inside, 7 lines from the top or 8 lines from the top. Aval b'she'ein berchesei and shavais. If their brachas are not equal, you have a radish and an olive. One is ha'etz, one is ha'adama. So in that case, divrei hakoil mavarich al zeh v'choizer u'mavarich al zeh. Everyone agrees. You recite the bracha on this one, and then you recite the bracha on that one. Now, what does that mean? You have radish and an olive. Which one should you recite the bracha on first, and which one should you recite? You do have to recite both brachas, the Gemara seems to say. You're going to recite 2 brachas, mevarich al zeh v'choizer u'mevarich al zeh. But what does that mean? Which one? What do you recite the bracha on? Everyone agrees. The rabbis who say you go by what you cherish, and Rabbi Yehuda says you go by from the 7 species. You recite the bracha on this one, and then you recite the bracha on that. Everyone agrees. Who do they agree to? In other words,
the favorite.
So you think it goes by the rabbis? It goes by the favorite.
Yeah.
No.
The Rabbi Yehuda agrees to the rabbis. Maybe it's the rabbis agree to Rabbi Yehuda that it goes by the 7 species. In this scenario, maybe you say the bracha on the 7 species. Yes, Ezra.
You have to go back to what the Torah says. It says "V'achalta v'savata uverachta." So the fact that it comes after the definition of what the Sheva Minim are, and the definition of the fact that you're talking about Eretz Yisrael. So in that situation, you would say that the item which is Sheva Minim first, and then the other ones.
Well, the verse that you're quoting is referring to the after bracha.
Yes, that's what we're talking about over here. It says V'divrei hakol.
And here we're talking about, you have two food items. You have a radish and you have an olive. And we want to know what bracha to start with. Which, you're going to say two brachas, ha'adama and ha'etz. Which one should you say first? Should you say the bracha on the 7 species, which is the ha'etz? Or should you say the bracha ha'adama on the radish if you like it better? Let's say you like the radish better. That will give us the two options here. On the one hand, the olive is from the 7 species. On the other hand, the radish, you like it. And so you have these two options of which bracha to recite first. And the rabbis would seemingly, the rabbi's view would seemingly be you go by what you cherish more. Let's say that's the radish. And Rabbi Yehuda would seemingly go by what you, the 7 species, the olive. But the Gemara says, no, they all agree in this case. There's not an argument because there's 2 separate brachas. Because there's 2 separate brachas, they all agree. But what do they agree to? So Ben wants to say they all agree to the rabbi's view, that it goes by what you cherish. What you cherish, that's even Rabbi Yehuda, who normally follows the 7 species, you go by, he agrees. In this case, you don't go by the 7 species. And the reason being, the simple understanding is that the Gemara, the simple proof for what Ben is saying would be the fact that we generally follow the majority.
Yep.
And that would be a good reason why Ben is right, that we follow the majority. So the Gemara says everyone agrees. In this case, they're probably agreeing to the majority, right? That's that. Otherwise, the Gemara should clarify who everyone's agreeing to. And since the Gemara doesn't clarify who everyone is agreeing to, it would make sense that they're all agreeing to the rabbi. So Ben's point is a very well taken point, but I will say that there are commentaries that disagree, but this is maybe the simple way of understanding it, that everyone agrees to the rabbis. Yes, Simone.
Yeah, didn't we earlier learn that if you said ha'adama on something that's both a fruit and something from the ground, that it covers both of them? But if you say ha'etz, it only covers the one of them. So I would think that this would apply to this situation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, it's a very good question. So we're going to learn Rashi then, because you're asking that. We're going to have to learn Rashi now inside. In the Rashi, which is on the right side of the page, the Rashi says, Aval b'she'ein berchosehen shavos, when their blessings are not equal, divrei hakoil, everyone agrees. I hope you all have the place, whereas 6 lines from the top. So there are 7 now 7 lines from the top. Divrei, the Dalet Hey means divrei hakoil, everyone agrees. Ein bracha achas peitrason, one bracha will not exempt them. You need to recite 2 brachas. And Veshuv ein kan machlekes, and now we return that there is no argument in this scenario. Now, everyone is going to agree. Now, what do we? Let's learn the simple way I started explaining, and that is that everyone will agree to the rabbis. And the rabbis would say that you recite the bracha on the radish because you like radishes better than olives. And so you're going to start off with the radish. You'll recite the ha'adama, and then you will recite the ha'etz. That's what it would seem like should be the appropriate understanding of the Gemara. Now, Rashi asks a very strong question, and Simone had just asked this question. Ve'afal gav, and even though Ditnan that we learned on page 40a, Beirach al ha'peiros ha'ilon, Beire pri ha'adama yatza. If a person recited the bracha on the fruit tree, on a fruit from a tree, you recited a bracha for a vegetable, ha'adama, you fulfilled your obligation. So why are we saying that you are going to be reciting two brachas here? You have a radish and an olive, and you first recite the bracha on the radish because you like it better, and afterwards you're going to have the olive because you want the olive, but you don't want it as much, and you're going to recite a ha'etz afterwards on the olive. Why are you reciting two brachas? The olive should have been exempted once you said the bracha ha'adama on the radish. This is the question that Rashi is bothered with, and let me just explain it once more. We have a Gemara that we learned before mentioned that if you recite the bracha Boire Pri Ha'adama on a fruit from a tree, you have fulfilled your obligation. So the question is that the Gemara here says if you have a radish and an olive, you recite the bracha on the radish first because you like radishes more, and then you recite the bracha on the olive afterwards. And the question is, what do you mean recite a bracha ha'etz on the olive? I already recited a ha'adama on the radish, and I have fulfilled my obligation. I said ha'adama on the radish, right? Seemingly I should have fulfilled my obligation. So Rashi here on page 41a, Rashi now answers, he says, no. Hani mili b'chad mina. This applies when you only have one item, v'ta'a uvirech aleha b'rei pri ha'adam, and you made a mistake, and you recited on this one item, you recited the bracha of ha'adama on this fruit. You made a mistake. And what that means is that the rabbis allowed this bracha to exempt a fruit, even though you said the wrong bracha. The rabbis established the brachas, and they established that a fruit tree, on a fruit from a tree, you recite Bari Pri Ha'etz, and on a vegetable from the ground, you recite Bari Pri Ha'adama. The rabbis established these brachas. You messed up. You said a Ha'adama on a fruit from a tree. The rabbis did not want your bracha to go in vain. I'm explaining the words of Rashi. This is not clearly in the words of Rashi, but I'm giving one of the explanations explains it this way. It's a little vague how Rashi words it, but this is one of the explanations, and that is that the rabbis did not want your bracha to go in vain, since the wording of your bracha was not totally wrong. It's fruit from a tree is also from the ground. Therefore, when you recite a Bari Pri Ha'adama on a fruit from a tree, the rabbi said, I don't want your bracha to go in vain. You fulfilled your obligation. You don't have to recite another bracha. That bracha is going to be good enough. The rabbis allowed that. The rabbis accepted that. They established the brachas, and they allowed that a ha'adama bracha will work for a ha'etz. That applies if you have one item and you messed up. Your bracha will not go in vain. It works. Aval tznoin v'zayis, but if you have a radish and you have an olive, and you ubirach al tznoin, and you recited the bracha on the tznoin, and the reason being because you cherish the radish more, and therefore you recited the bracha on the tznoin. So you said a ha'adama. Is that gonna exempt the olive? No way. Why should it exempt the olive? The bracha ha'adama that you recited is on the radish. And if the bracha is on the radish, it's not in vain. Should you now recite a ha'etz on the olive? Of course you should recite a ha'etz on the olive. That case where the rabbis allowed a ha'adama bracha to work for a ha'etz is in order that your bracha does not go in vain. And therefore they allowed it to work. They didn't say, oh, you say a ha'etz and it's going to go exempt all your, you say a ha'adama, it's going to exempt all the fruits from now on. No, it's in the case where you messed up and you've said the bracha on the wrong, on a fruit from a tree. You said a ha'adama, that works. They don't want the bracha to go in vain. But if you recited a ha'adama and you have in mind, oh, I'm going to have some apples afterwards, I'm going to have some olives, that's not going to exempt it. The olive is not exempted from that bracha. So that is that is the answer to Simone's question. Yes, Ezra.
You basically said before that because the majority rules, and so therefore the rabbis would say go according to whatever you like, which in this case might be the radish. I would say that Rabbi Yehuda may say, I'll go along with them because you still are going to have to require a separate bracha for ala eitz for the zayit, and so therefore, to me, it's not a problem. It's not a question of my bracha not happening. The fact is, my bracha will happen in this particular case, and so therefore, I don't have any time against the rabbis in having it to go the way that Ben suggested, or the Gemara suggests.
Beautiful, Ezra. Very nice. So what Ben was saying was that it's the Rabbi Yehuda agrees with the rabbis, and I simply added that it makes sense to say that because the Gemara leaves it vague, and that would be a logical assumption. Is if it wasn't that way, the Gemara should have clarified it, because the norm is that you follow the majority. Now Ezra gave an explanation why that is. Why would Rabbi Yehuda agree to the rabbis? So what Ezra said is explaining the reason behind it. And that is that Rabbi Yehuda, why would he not keep up his argument in this case? You have two brachas. You have a ha'etz bracha and a ha'adama bracha. And the ha'etz bracha is on one of the 7 species, the shivas haminim. You have the ha'etz bracha, and if you had an apple and an olive, Rabbi Yehuda says you recite the bracha on the olive and you have in mind the apple, and that's the way to do it, because you got to give honor to the 7 species. So recite the bracha on the olive, and you have in mind you exempt the apple as well, but you recite the bracha on the olive because it's from the 7 species. Why would Rabbi Yehuda give in to the rabbis when it comes to a radish and an olive? Rabbi Yehuda says, yeah, recite the bracha on the radish. The radish is not from the 7 species. It's a Bayer Pri Adama. Why would they say recite the bracha on the radish? What? Radish? I have an olive here from the 7 species. And so Ezra explained, because I'm going to recite a bracha on the olive. I'm reciting it. It's not a problem. It's not like I'm not reciting the bracha. I'm giving the olive for the 7 species an honor by saying a bracha on the olive. I'm honoring the 7 species. The 7 species deserve honor because they're fruits that Israel is blessed with. I am giving them the honor of reciting a bracha. Which one comes first? Okay, you want to say this one first, say that. But am I giving it the honor that it deserves of reciting a bracha? I'm doing that. So Rabbi Yehuda will agree to the rabbis that now you could do the one you cherish, and you're also reciting a bracha on it. but I'm doing the one I cherish, I'm doing that first. So thank you, Ezra, very nice. Now, the commentaries explain that the reason you recite a bracha on the one you cherish, why do the rabbis put such emphasis on the one you cherish more? The rabbis say because something you cherish, you will have much more intensity in the bracha when you recite the bracha on it. So we want to recite that bracha, give that bracha, let it have that let that bracha come first, that you're going to show.
Give it the fervor. Give it the fervor.
Give it more fervor.
Right.
So you recite the bracha, that bracha first, or you recite that bracha on the that food. So this gives a little explanation. In other words, the rabbis said the rabbis are arguing with Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says you got to give honor to the 7 species. The rabbis say you got to give honor, you got to say the bracha with more intensity. So on the one hand, there's a reason to honor the 7 species. This is what Israel is blessed with. You're honoring you're giving chashivas to the item. And on the other hand, the rabbis are emphasizing the importance, the concentration that you're having in the actual bracha, that you're reciting it with more intensity. So so this is the opinion of Ula, how Ula explains the Mishnah and the argument between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis. So let's go back to the Gemara now. We're on page 41a. Meisvei. Meisvei is the Bnei Yeshiva, the yeshiva, the Talmudic school asked a question on Ula. Meisvei.
Rabbi, it's time.
Oh, it's 11 o'clock. I could have gone another hour.
I know, that's what I was afraid of.
Oh, no, don't be afraid of that. It's okay.
Should we do a
It
few minutes?
wasn't Friday, so would
Yeah, a
we.
few minutes is okay.
It's
we
very
just do a
interesting.
little?
It's really super interesting. So
let me just read 2 lines over here. Meisvei, they asked the question on Ula. Hayu lafanav tznoim. Where the first word on the line is hayu, which is about 8 lines or 9 lines down from the top. 41a. Hayu lafanav tznoim. If a person had a radish in front of him, the zayas, and an olive in front of him. Mevarech al hatznoim. You recite the bracha on the radish, upaiter es hazayas, and you exempt the olive. Now, we see here that Ula said that you recite the bracha on each of them, and the Brisa seems to say that you recite the bracha on one and it exempts the other. So on this, the Gemara explains. On this, the Gemara says, "Hacha b'mayoskinon." The Gemara answers that here, what are we talking about? Kishahatznoin ikar, when the radish is the main food in this dish. So you have radishes and olives. And the radish is the main thing. The olive is secondary to the radish. In other words, it's not like you have 2 fruits in front of you. It's more like you have a mixture of the 2, and one of them is the main food of this meal, the main ingredient in this mixture, and the other is like a secondary thing. And so when you have a main ingredient and a secondary thing, then you only recite one bracha. But of course, if you have an olive and you have a radish in a separate items, you would recite each bracha. Here we're talking about you have a case where one of them is more of a main food, and the other one is a secondary food. Now, I gave an example where it's sort of like a mixture, but that is not the way Rashi learns it here. I just wanted to give you an understanding. Now, the way Rashi words it is that the the tznoin is ikr, the main thing is the radish, and the olive is secondary. The example that Rashi gives is you're eating because you want the radish. You want the radish, but because it's so sharp, you eat an olive in order to blunt the sharpness of the radish. So you're not eating it really for its own purpose. It's secondary for the purpose of eating the radish, and therefore the radish is the main thing. You would recite the bracha on the radish, and the olive would be secondary. So that is the initial answer of the Gemara. The Gemara is going to continue back and forth, but we'll have to push it off for Sunday. Have a wonderful Shabbos, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Rabbi, I'm sorry I stopped you, but I have a lot of snow to clear.
It's not our
Gotta move to
problem.
Florida. No excuse. Move
Move
to
to Florida,
Florida.
Ben. Move to Florida, Ben. Shabbat
Good luck,
shalom.
Ben.
Okay, good Shabbos.